The restaurant was always full of light, laughter, and the soft sound of silver spoons touching crystal glasses. Every night, rich people filled the place, their voices calm and confident, their clothes shining under the warm glow of chandeliers. But among them moved a quiet waitress, small and graceful, who carried plates and glasses with care. Her name was Emily. Most guests never really saw her. She smiled when spoken to, nodded when given an order, and disappeared again into the kitchen. For them, she was only part of the service, someone who came and went like background music. But when her shift ended and the restaurant emptied, the whole place changed. The tables stood clean and quiet. The smell of perfume faded, leaving only the faint scent of coffee and polish. That was when Emily's world came alive. She would look around to make sure no one was watching, then slowly walk to the corner of the lounge where an old black piano stood. It had been there for years, mostly as decoration. The regular pianist played it sometimes during dinner hours, but no one cared much for it. To Emily, it was something magical. She would gently lift the cover, her heart already beating faster. Her fingers were tired from carrying trays all day, but the moment they touched the keys, the world around her disappeared. She didn't need notes or books. The songs lived inside her, deep and warm, like something she was born with. Her music filled the empty hall, soft at first, then stronger until the sound seemed to paint the air. The chairs, the glasses, even the polished floors seemed to listen. Sometimes the night guard would stop and watch her secretly, not wanting to interrupt. Her face changed completely when she played. The tired waitress was gone. What remained was a woman lost in her own melody, her eyes closed, her body moving gently with each note. It was like the piano spoke for her when she couldn't speak for herself. She had loved the piano since she was a child. Her mother used to work as a cleaner in a local school, and after hours, Emily would sit at the music room piano and press the keys softly while waiting for her mother to finish. A kind teacher had shown her a few songs. She learned quickly, and soon playing became her secret world. But when her mother fell sick and money grew short, lessons stopped. She had to start working early, leaving dreams behind. Life turned into a list of bills, shifts, and tired nights. Yet even through hard times, music never really left her. It stayed hidden inside, waiting. Now, years later, that secret part of her still lived. Each night after work, she came back to it quietly, as if visiting an old friend. She didn't tell anyone. She was afraid they would laugh or think it strange. For the people she worked with, she was just the quiet one. She didn't go out much, didn't talk about her past, didn't join gossip. But there was a kindness in her that made people trust her. When others forgot their wallets, she covered for them. When someone cried in the kitchen, she listened. Still, no one knew about her gift. One evening, after a long day, Emily played longer than usual. The restaurant was completely empty, and outside, the city lights blinked like small stars. Her fingers moved quickly, full of emotion. She played a tune she remembered from childhood, something she hadn't touched in years. The notes danced, soft and smooth, until suddenly she heard clapping. She turned around, startled. It was the night guard, smiling shyly. He said, "You play like a dream. You should play in front of people someday." Emily laughed quietly, shaking her head. "No," she said. "This is just for me." She didn't believe anyone would want to listen. The next morning, she came to work early. The manager, a strict but fair man, was busy checking bookings. The place was preparing for a big charity event scheduled for the next week. Important guests were expected, business owners, celebrities, even a few politicians. The staff were nervous, making sure everything would be perfect. Emily listened quietly as the manager gave orders. He spoke about decorations, food, and entertainment. A professional pianist had been hired for the evening to play soft background music. Emily smiled faintly when she heard that. She wondered what kind of songs he would play. Maybe classical pieces she loved but rarely heard live. The days before the event passed quickly. Emily worked extra hours to help with cleaning and arranging the tables. Her feet hurt every night, but she didn't complain. She saved every little tip she earned, hoping to fix her old keyboard at home someday. Sometimes, while polishing glasses, she caught herself humming small melodies under her breath. One of her coworkers noticed and said she had a beautiful voice, but Emily just blushed and laughed it off. The night before the big event, she stayed late again. Everyone had left and the place was silent. She walked to the piano almost out of habit. Her reflection looked back at her from the shiny surface, tired but gentle. She sat down and let her fingers move without thinking. The tune was soft and sad like a whisper. It spoke of dreams that never came true and hope that never died. As she played, she imagined what it would feel like to perform in front of people, to be heard and seen, to share something that came straight from her heart. The thought made her smile, though she quickly shook it away. She knew her place. She was a waitress. The piano was not her stage, it was her escape. That night, while locking up, the manager passed by and heard faint music. He opened the door slightly and saw Emily at the piano. He didn't say anything, just listened for a while. The melody was so pure and emotional that it softened his usual strictness. When she finally noticed him, she jumped up, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly. "I was just cleaning and—" He interrupted her gently. "You play well," he said. "Didn't know you could do that." She nodded, her face red. He didn't comment further and left, but he kept thinking about it long after he went home. The next day, everyone talked about the upcoming event again. The decorations arrived. The tables were dressed in white cloth, and the golden lights were adjusted to give everything a warm glow. Emily worked quietly, arranging candles and flowers. She noticed how much effort went into creating an evening that would last only a few hours. The guests would come, eat, talk, and leave. Everything would return to normal. But something about this event felt different. She couldn't explain why. As the day ended, a sudden problem appeared. The manager received a phone call from the hired pianist's agent. The musician had fallen ill and would not be able to perform. Panic spread instantly. The event was only a day away, and finding a replacement on such short notice seemed impossible. The manager made a few calls, but everyone was already booked. He walked back and forth, rubbing his forehead, muttering about how disastrous it would look to host a charity night without music. Emily stood nearby, holding a tray, hesitating. She wanted to speak but was afraid. Finally, she gathered courage and said softly, "I could play if you need someone." The room went quiet. A few waiters laughed. One said, "You? The waitress? You can play the piano?" Emily nodded, her face turning pink. The manager looked surprised but didn't say no right away. He asked, "Are you sure you can handle it?" "These are important people. We can't take risks," she replied. "I'll try my best." "You heard me last night." He thought for a moment, remembering the soft melody that had stayed in his mind. Finally, he sighed and said, "All right. If we can't find anyone else, you'll play. Don't make me regret it." Emily nodded, her heart racing. The others whispered among themselves, some amused, others curious. That night, when she went home, she could hardly sleep. She felt both nervous and excited. It was strange how quickly life could change. She thought about her mother, about those evenings in the empty schoolroom, about the way her hands had once learned to speak through music.
Maybe this was her chance to bring that part of herself back.
She promised quietly, "I'll do my best." Then she closed her eyes and imagined the piano keys under her fingers, glowing like small stars. The next evening, as she walked to the restaurant, the streets were filled with lights. Her simple shoes clicked softly on the pavement. She carried no makeup, no fancy dress, just the same uniform she wore every day. But inside her heart, something new was burning, something close to hope. The world around her still looked the same, but she knew tomorrow would not be like any other night. Something was about to happen, something that would make people remember her not as a quiet waitress, but as someone who once played a song they would never forget. The morning of the charity night arrived with bright sunlight, but inside the restaurant everything felt tense. The manager moved around giving quick orders, his voice sharper than usual. Waiters polished glasses for the 5th time, chefs double-checked every plate, and decorators added last touches to the tables. There were golden napkins, crystal candle holders, and small vases with white flowers. It was the most elegant the place had ever looked. But behind the beauty, everyone carried quiet worry about the missing pianist. Emily came early, her uniform perfectly ironed, her hair neatly tied back. Her hands trembled a little when she carried trays. She had barely slept, replaying in her mind what she would do if she really had to perform. She had practiced on her old keyboard late into the night, imagining the restaurant full of people watching her. The thought scared her, but there was also something beautiful about it. The idea that maybe just once her music would be heard. The manager still tried to find another musician, making phone calls between instructions. But as the day went on, it became clear no one was available on such short notice. Finally, just before noon, he walked over to Emily and said quietly, "It's up to you." For a moment she didn't move. She only looked at him, her heart beating fast. "You really want me to play?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yes, don't think too much. Just do what you did the other night." She smiled nervously and said she would do her best. The other staff exchanged looks, some doubtful, some curious. One of them whispered, "She'll freeze in front of all those people." Another said, "Or maybe she'll surprise everyone." Emily pretended not to hear. She knew people's opinions didn't matter now. What mattered was not disappointing the manager who had trusted her. As the sun began to set, the restaurant transformed. Candles were lit, and the golden lights glowed softly across the hall. Expensive cars arrived one after another outside, and guests began stepping out, dressed in fine suits and long dresses. The sound of their laughter mixed with the gentle clinking of glasses as waiters served drinks. The air smelled of perfume and roasted food. Emily watched quietly from behind the counter. She had been told she could start playing once everyone was seated. Her hands were cold as she stood near the piano. It looked grand tonight, polished until it shined. She touched the edge of the instrument lightly, almost as if asking for courage. The noise around her felt distant. She could hear her own heartbeat louder than anything else. Finally, the manager gave her a small nod from across the room. It was time. Emily took a deep breath, stepped forward, and sat on the bench. A few people turned their heads, surprised to see a waitress at the piano. She ignored the whispers and focused on the keys. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her hands hovered in the air. Then she remembered her mother's voice from long ago telling her, "Play from your heart, not from your hands." She pressed the first note. It was soft and shaky. The sound floated gently through the room, almost lost under the quiet conversation of the guests. She played the next few notes, and something inside her began to shift. The rhythm steadied. Her fingers started to flow. The melody grew stronger, round and warm, like a voice telling a story. Slowly, the sound filled the hall. One by one, the guests stopped talking. Forks rested on plates. Heads turned toward the piano. The room grew quieter until only her music remained. It was a soft tune, full of emotion, something she had written herself years ago but never shared. Every note carried a piece of her life, her childhood, her mother's smile, her long nights of hard work. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. Her fingers moved with confidence, as if they knew exactly where to go. Her eyes closed for a moment, and she let the music take control. The noise of the crowd faded completely. In that moment, she was no longer a waitress. She was simply a woman sharing her soul through sound. At the back of the hall, the manager stood frozen, watching. He had expected something simple, maybe even awkward, but what he heard was deep and graceful. Unlike anything he'd imagined, the guests were silent, not out of politeness, but because they were moved. The melody was gentle yet powerful, carrying an honesty that expensive performances rarely had. When Emily finished her first piece, the room stayed still for a heartbeat, and then applause broke out. It started softly, then grew louder and louder until everyone was clapping. She looked up in surprise, her eyes wide. The sight of people standing, smiling, and applauding made her chest tighten. She bowed her head slightly, her face turning red, and whispered a quiet thank you. The manager walked over and whispered, "Keep going." So she played again. This time she chose something brighter, a cheerful tune she had practiced just in case. It was light, quick, and full of joy. The guests began tapping their feet softly. Some even smiled at each other, nodding in rhythm. The energy in the room changed. What had started as a formal dinner began to feel like a celebration. Throughout the evening, Emily played several pieces, each one different, some soft like whispers, others fast and bright like laughter. The wealthy guests who had arrived with calm, proud faces now looked amazed. A few recorded her quietly on their phones. No one cared that she wore a simple uniform. What mattered was the way her fingers spoke. During a break, one older woman approached her and said gently, "My dear, your music reminded me of my daughter. She used to play like that." Emily smiled shyly and thanked her. It was the first time a guest had ever spoken to her like an equal. She returned to her seat at the piano, feeling lighter. Hours passed quickly. When the night finally began to wind down, Emily played one last song, the same tune she often played alone after closing time. It was quiet and slow, full of memories. The hall listened again in complete silence. The candles burned low and the golden light shimmered softly. When the final note faded, there was a long pause before applause filled the room once more. Afterward, as guests began leaving, many stopped to thank her. Some shook her hand. A man in a dark suit said, "You played beautifully, miss. You have a gift." Emily smiled, unsure how to respond. Compliments felt strange, but she was happy. Deeply happy. When the restaurant finally emptied and the last guest's car disappeared into the night, the staff started cleaning. The manager came to her side, still looking amazed. "You did better than any pianist we could have hired," he said with a small smile. "You made this night special." Emily didn't know what to say. She only nodded and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me." He told her she could take the next day off. As she walked home, the streets were quiet. The air was cool and the city lights reflected on the wet road. She thought about everything that had happened, how quickly fear had turned into something beautiful. It all felt unreal, like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. When she reached her small apartment, she sat on her bed and looked at her hands. They were still slightly trembling. She smiled to herself and whispered, "I did it." She knew tomorrow she would go back to being the quiet waitress, carrying trays and cleaning tables. But tonight, for a few shining hours, she had been something else, someone the world saw and heard. She closed her eyes, the faint sound of applause still echoing in her mind. It was a night she would never forget, and deep inside, she felt that it was only the beginning of something she couldn't yet imagine. The next day, everyone at the restaurant could still feel the magic from the night before. The event had ended, but people were still talking about the waitress who played like a professional pianist. The kitchen staff whispered about it while cutting vegetables. The servers smiled to each other when they passed, and even the manager seemed to walk a little differently. Proud and surprised at how the night had turned out, Emily came in quietly as usual. Though her heart was still full, she didn't know how to explain what she felt. It was as if a light had been turned on inside her that she didn't want to lose. The guests' faces, their smiles, their applause, it all replayed in her mind again and again. She had gone home after the event and sat by her window until morning, too happy to sleep. When she entered the restaurant that morning, some of her co-workers clapped jokingly and said, "Our star pianist is here." She laughed shyly and said, "I just got lucky." But inside she was still trembling with joy. The manager called her into his office a few minutes later. She walked in nervously, unsure what to expect. He was sitting behind his desk looking at some papers, but when he looked up, he smiled. "You did something amazing last night," he said. "I didn't expect that kind of performance. You made the event unforgettable." Emily smiled and said softly, "Thank you, sir. I was just trying not to make a mistake." He leaned back in his chair. "Well, you didn't. In fact, some guests asked about you after you left. One of them wanted to know if you perform anywhere else." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Me perform?" "Yes," he said with a small laugh. "I told them you're one of our best waitresses, not a professional musician. They didn't believe me." He paused, his voice gentler now. "You have real talent, Emily. You should think about doing something with it." She looked down, unsure how to respond. The idea of becoming something more than a waitress felt too big, too far away. "I don't know where to start," she said honestly. He nodded slowly. "Well, sometimes things have a way of starting on their own. Just don't hide your gift again." She thanked him and went back to work, but his words stayed in her mind. Later that afternoon, as she was setting tables, a man came into the restaurant carrying a small leather briefcase. He was well-dressed but friendly-looking. The manager walked over quickly to greet him. After a few words, the manager turned toward Emily and said, "There she is." The man smiled and approached her. "You must be the pianist from last night," he said warmly. "I'm glad I found you. My name's Daniel. I was at the event." "You were wonderful." Emily froze, unsure how to respond. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron. "Oh, thank you." "I was just filling in. The real musician couldn't come." Daniel laughed softly. "Well, if you were just filling in, I'd love to meet whoever the real one is. You played with so much heart. It's rare these days." She felt her cheeks warm. "That's very kind of you." He went on, "I actually run a small music foundation. We help young musicians who can't afford lessons or instruments. I'd like to invite you to our studio sometime. No pressure, just come and play for us. I think we can help you grow." Emily stared at him, speechless. For a moment, the sounds of the restaurant faded, the clinking of plates, the chatter, the kitchen noise. It felt like the world had stopped moving. Someone was offering her something she'd never imagined possible. I don't know, she stammered. I've never been to a studio before. I'm not trained or anything. That's fine, he said gently. You don't need training to have talent. Come by next week if you can. He handed her his card. You have something special. Don't let it stay hidden. When he left, Emily stood still, holding the card in her hand. She looked at it as if it were made of gold. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Her mind kept returning to what he'd said. That evening, after her shift, she walked home slowly. The city lights glowed around her, and she kept thinking about what it would mean to play again, not just for herself, but for people who really listened. She took the card out of her pocket and read the name over and over. Maybe, she whispered, maybe I should try. Over the next few days, she practiced more than ever. Her small apartment filled with music late into the night. The neighbors sometimes stopped outside her door to listen. One woman even slipped a note under her door that said, "Beautiful music. Please keep playing." That small message made Emily smile. When the day came to visit the studio, she almost changed her mind twice. She felt nervous, unsure what kind of people she would meet there, but she remembered how it had felt when the crowd clapped for her. That memory pushed her forward. The studio was in a quiet part of the city, a tall old building with wide windows. When she walked in, she smelled coffee and new wood. Inside, people were tuning instruments, talking softly and laughing. It felt warm and alive. Daniel greeted her with a smile. "You came," he said. "I'm glad." He led her into a small room with a grand piano. It was bigger and shinier than anything she had ever played before. Her hands trembled when she touched the keys. "Take your time," Daniel said kindly. "Play whatever you like." She took a deep breath and began to play. At first, her fingers felt heavy, but then the sound filled the room and she forgot about everything else. The melody came easily, like breathing. She didn't look up until she finished, and when she did, Daniel and a few others were standing by the door, smiling. One of them said, "You have a natural gift." "No training, really?" Emily shook her head, almost embarrassed. Daniel said, "You have something rare, something that can't be taught. I think we can help you shape it." She felt tears in her eyes, but quickly blinked them away. "Thank you," she whispered. After that day, she began visiting the studio in her free time. She learned about music theory, practiced different styles, and even tried writing small pieces of her own. Daniel and the teachers treated her with kindness and respect. She started to believe in herself for the first time in years. One evening, after a long session, Daniel said, "We're holding a small concert next month. Some local artists will perform. I'd like you to play one of your pieces." The words made her heart stop. "Me? On a stage?" "Yes," he said simply. "You'll be wonderful." "Trust me," she smiled nervously. "I'll try." The following weeks were a mix of excitement and fear. She practiced every chance she got, even during lunch breaks at the restaurant. Her coworkers noticed the change in her. She was still quiet, but there was a lightness in her step, a new energy that made her seem different. The manager noticed it too. "So," he said one evening, "you've got a concert coming up?" Emily nodded shyly. "Just a small one," he smiled. "Well, small things can lead to big ones. I'll be there if I can." The night of the concert came quickly. Emily stood backstage, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would break through her chest. She looked out from behind the curtain and saw rows of people waiting. She spotted Daniel in the front, smiling at her encouragingly. When her name was called, she walked out slowly and sat down at the piano. Her hands shook for a moment, but then she remembered the restaurant, the sound of the guests clapping and her mother's gentle voice saying, "Play from your heart." She took a breath and began to play. The sound rose softly at first, then stronger, flowing like a story she had always wanted to tell. The audience listened quietly, completely still. The music filled the room with warmth and peace. When the last note ended, silence hung in the air for a long second. Then applause burst out. Emily looked up and saw people smiling, some even wiping their eyes. She smiled too, her heart full. For the second time in her life, she felt seen. After the concert, Daniel came up and said, "You did it. You were wonderful." Emily laughed softly, still shaking. "I was so nervous I almost forgot how to breathe." He smiled. "That's how you know it mattered." That night, as she walked home, she didn't feel small or invisible anymore. She had faced her fear, shared her gift, and touched hearts again. She didn't know where life would take her next, but for the first time, she believed it might lead somewhere beautiful. The next few weeks felt like a dream that Emily never wanted to end. After the concert, people from the Music Foundation talked to her about future performances and possible lessons. Daniel told her that several guests had asked for her name, wanting to know where they could hear her play again. She was surprised every time someone mentioned her, as if they were talking about someone else entirely. At the restaurant, she still worked the same shifts, but life seemed brighter. Customers now recognized her as the pianist from the charity night, and sometimes they asked her questions about music or requested her to play a little tune after work. The manager, who once seemed strict and distant, now looked at her with quiet pride. He even set up a small electric piano in one corner for slow evenings, encouraging her to play softly while people dined. The guests loved it, and soon more people began coming just to hear her. But along with the happiness came a growing pressure. Emily wanted to live up to everyone's expectations. Every night after her shift, she stayed up practicing, afraid that if she stopped, her new world would disappear. Her hands began to ache sometimes and her eyes grew tired, but she told herself that dreams needed effort. One evening, as she played softly in the restaurant, a couple entered, elegant, dressed in dark evening clothes, clearly people of wealth and influence. They listened for a while, whispering to each other. When she finished her piece, they clapped quietly and the woman smiled at her. Later, the man approached her and said, "That was beautiful. My wife and I are hosting a private dinner next month for several important guests. We would love for you to play there. Would you be interested?" Emily hesitated, her heart suddenly beating faster. "I'd be honored," she said, her voice almost trembling. The man handed her a small card. "Our assistant will contact you with the details. It's an exclusive event, but your music deserves to be heard by the best audience." After they left, she stood holding the card, unsure if she should feel joy or fear. It was another chance, perhaps a bigger one than she ever dreamed of, but also a step into a world far above her own. Over the following days, Daniel helped her prepare. He encouraged her to focus on emotion rather than perfection. "The people who matter," he told her, "aren't looking for flawless notes. They're looking for truth." Still, Emily couldn't help feeling nervous. She had never played in a mansion before, never performed for people who measured success in wealth and reputation. The night before the event, she barely slept. She sat by her window looking at the stars, wondering how her life had changed so much in such a short time. When the evening arrived, she took a deep breath and stepped out of the car that Daniel had arranged for her. The mansion stood tall and glittering under golden lights, surrounded by gardens and fountains. Inside, everything shimmered: the chandeliers, the marble floors, the laughter of guests who seemed to belong to another world. A butler led her to the piano, a grand black instrument that looked more valuable than her entire apartment. The guests were mingling, sipping drinks and chatting softly. She could feel their eyes occasionally turning toward her, curious but polite. When the host announced her name, she sat down and placed her hands on the keys. For a brief second, she thought of her small restaurant, the chipped cups, the warm laughter of her co-workers. She closed her eyes and began to play. At first, the sound was delicate, almost shy. But as she lost herself in the music, her fingers began to move with confidence and feeling. The chatter slowly faded, replaced by silence as people turned to listen. Even the servers paused. The melody filled the hall with warmth that didn't come from wealth or luxury. It came from something real, something human. When she finished, the applause came like a wave. It wasn't loud or wild, but deep and sincere. People came up to her later, thanking her for the music, asking about her background. The hostess said softly, "Your music reminded me of when I used to dream." That one sentence touched Emily more than anything. After the event, Daniel found her near the garden outside. She stood under a tall tree, holding her hands together as if afraid to move. "You did wonderfully," he said. Emily smiled faintly. It didn't feel real. "It's real," he said, "and it's only the beginning." But as he said it, she looked back at the mansion, the glowing windows and the laughter echoing from inside. Part of her wondered if she truly belonged in that world or if she was only visiting it for a short while. The days after that event were full of new offers and invitations. Small performance requests came from nearby hotels and events. Her name started appearing on small posters and social media pages connected to the foundation. People called her the self-taught pianist or the waitress who became a star. But with more attention came new challenges. The restaurant started losing her time as she accepted performances. The manager, though proud, had to hire new staff to cover her missed shifts. One evening, he gently pulled her aside and said, "Emily, I'm happy for you, really, but be careful. The world that praises you can also forget you quickly. Don't lose who you are," she nodded, touched by his words. She promised she wouldn't. Still, she could feel the distance growing. Some co-workers whispered that fame had changed her. Others looked at her differently, no longer just as one of them, but as someone heading toward a brighter life. She missed the simplicity of serving food, hearing laughter, and knowing exactly where she stood. One evening, after a small concert, she sat alone at the piano long after everyone had left. The hall was empty, the lights dim. Her fingers rested on the keys, but she didn't play. She just sat quietly, listening to the silence. She thought about her mother, the one who used to tell her that music could open doors the heart couldn't. Maybe this was what she meant. But Emily also knew that open doors led to places she didn't always understand. A week later, she received a message that surprised her. The wealthy woman from the mansion invited her again, this time for an even grander charity gala with several influential guests. It was going to be her biggest audience yet. When Emily read the message, she felt both thrilled and scared. This was everything she had worked for, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was slipping away. She looked around her small apartment, at the simple things she loved, and whispered, "Don't let me forget who I am." She practiced for hours every day leading up to the event, determined to give her best performance yet. Daniel reminded her to take care of herself, but she brushed it off, saying, "I'll rest after." The night of the gala finally came. The hall was larger, brighter, filled with more people than she had ever seen gathered in one place. Famous figures from music, art, and business sat at the front tables. Cameras flashed and waiters moved gracefully through the crowd. When it was her turn to perform, she felt a sudden calm. She stepped onto the stage, her long dress shimmering softly under the lights. As she sat down, she remembered the restaurant, the sound of clinking glasses, the faces of her friends. Then, with a deep breath, she began to play. Her music flowed like a river, gentle, strong, and alive. It told her story without words. The quiet waitress, the lonely keyboard, the moment she took a chance. Every note was a piece of her life. When the final chord faded, there was silence, then thunderous applause. People stood cheering, calling her name. Flashing lights surrounded her, but she barely noticed. For her, the real beauty was in the music, the feeling that she had finally shared her true self with the world. As she bowed, tears filled her eyes. Somewhere in the crowd, she saw Daniel smiling proudly. In that moment, Emily knew this was more than just a performance. It was a promise, to herself, to the people who believed in her, and to the dream that had carried her through every quiet night. She walked off the stage with her heart full, unaware that the next part of her journey was about to begin, a part that would test everything she had learned so far, and reveal how strong her spirit truly was. In the days following the grand gala, Emily's life began to move faster than she ever imagined. The performance had gone beyond what anyone expected, and news of the waitress who had played like a professional pianist started to spread. Local newspapers wrote small pieces about her, calling her the girl with golden fingers. The video clips from the event, taken by guests on their phones, went viral online. People everywhere were touched by her story. The quiet worker who had stunned a room full of the city's richest people with nothing more than a piano and a heart full of music. At first, Emily didn't know how to react. She still took the bus to the restaurant, still tied her apron every morning, still cleaned tables and smiled at customers. But more and more often, people would stop her and ask, "Are you the pianist from that video?" Some even asked for selfies, which made her laugh in disbelief. The restaurant became busier, and the manager proudly told everyone, "That's our girl." Daniel helped her manage the sudden attention. He reminded her that fame was unpredictable, and that what really mattered was her love for music. "Don't chase the noise," he told her one evening. "Let your music stay true. That's what people felt when they listened to you." Emily tried to hold on to that advice. But new offers began pouring in. More events, interviews, invitations to perform at bigger venues. Each one brought excitement but also confusion. She had never dealt with contracts, agents, or sponsors. Daniel helped where he could, but even he warned her to stay careful. "Some people will want your talent," he said gently, "but not all of them will care about you." Despite the whirlwind, Emily found comfort in her nightly practice. The piano had become her quiet space, her anchor. She practiced for hours after her shifts, sometimes until dawn, trying to perfect each note. The sound of the keys was like breathing, something she couldn't live without anymore. One morning, she received a letter that took her breath away. It was an invitation from a national music company, offering her a spot in their annual showcase where upcoming musicians performed before well-known producers and investors. It was the kind of chance that could change a person's life forever. She showed the letter to Daniel, and he smiled proudly but also with concern. "This is big," he said. "Are you ready for it?" Emily hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "What if I fail?" He looked at her calmly. "You've already won in ways that matter. But if you want to take this step, I'll be right beside you." Over the next few weeks, she poured everything into preparing. She took days off from the restaurant, practicing nonstop. The manager understood, though it saddened him to see her drift further away from the place where it all began. "Promise me you'll come back to visit," he said with a half-smile. "We'll keep your corner ready." She promised she would. When the day of the showcase arrived, the concert hall was larger than anything she had seen before. Lights hung from high ceilings, and the stage gleamed under their glow. The audience was filled with music critics, producers, and artists from all over the country. Emily stood backstage, feeling small among all the professionals in their fine clothes and confident smiles. A stagehand handed her a microphone and whispered, "You're up next," she nodded, her hands trembling. For a moment she thought about her old life, the clinking of glasses, the smell of coffee, the quiet hum of the restaurant where she first played. She remembered the feeling of that small crowd's applause, how genuine and warm it had been. That memory gave her courage. When she walked on stage, the lights blinded her for a second. The audience looked distant, their faces hidden in the shadows. She sat down at the grand piano, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Then, she began to play. The hall filled with a melody that was gentle and deep, like a story told through sound. Each note carried a piece of her journey, the loneliness of her past, the hope that had guided her, the kindness of those who believed in her. The audience listened in complete silence, as if afraid to breathe and break the spell. When the final note faded, there was a long pause before applause erupted. It was louder and longer than she had ever heard before. People stood up cheering. Emily looked out at them, stunned. She bowed slowly, her heart full. After the performance, producers and reporters crowded around her backstage. Some offered business cards, others asked for interviews. She smiled politely, still in a daze. Daniel finally found her and gently pulled her aside. "You did it," he said quietly. "You truly did it." Tears came to her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "No, Emily, it was always in you. You just needed someone to remind you." As the weeks passed, Emily's world expanded even more. She began traveling for small concerts, meeting people who had followed her story online. Every place she went, she was greeted with warmth and admiration. People often told her how her music gave them hope, and each time she heard that, she felt humbled. But fame brought its shadows too. There were critics who said she didn't belong in the professional scene, that she lacked formal training. Others accused her of being just a lucky waitress rather than a true artist. Those words hurt deeply, even though she tried to ignore them. Some nights she sat alone at her piano, wondering if she really belonged in this new world. Daniel noticed her growing weariness. One evening, after rehearsal, he found her sitting silently at the piano, her hands resting on the keys but not playing. He asked softly, "What's wrong?" She shook her head. "I don't know who I am anymore. They say I'm not good enough, that I don't deserve this. Maybe they're right." Daniel sat beside her. "Emily, music doesn't come from lessons or rules. It comes from the heart. Those people don't understand what you've given the world. You've reminded them that beauty can come from anywhere." She listened quietly, his words sinking deep into her heart. "But it's hard," she whispered. Sometimes I miss my old life. The restaurant, the quiet nights. I knew who I was then. He smiled gently. You're still that same person. You just have a bigger stage now. After that conversation, Emily began to find balance again. She spent her mornings volunteering at the foundation where she had first practiced, helping other young musicians who couldn't afford lessons. She taught them the way Daniel had taught her, to play with feeling, not fear. The joy on their faces reminded her why she had started playing in the first place. Months later, she received an invitation to perform at a charity concert in her old neighborhood. It would be a small event compared to the grand halls she had grown used to, but she accepted immediately. When she arrived at the familiar streets, memories rushed back, the late nights, the long shifts, the smell of food and laughter. As she stepped inside the old restaurant, the manager greeted her with open arms. "Our star is back," he said, grinning. Emily laughed and hugged him tightly. "I never forgot this place." That night, she played the same tune she had once, played long ago when she was just a nervous waitress with a secret dream. The same melody, but now with the grace and experience that her journey had given her. The customers listened quietly, some with tears in their eyes. When she finished, the applause was warm and familiar. It wasn't the roar of a concert hall, it was the kind of applause that came from people who truly cared. As she looked around, Emily realized that her journey had come full circle. She had climbed high and walked through fear, but she had never lost the heart that started it all. The fame, the attention, the lights, those were beautiful, but what truly mattered was the music and the people it touched. That night as she left the restaurant, the cool wind brushed her face. She looked up at the sky, smiling softly. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that her story wasn't ending. It was simply finding a new rhythm. And as the stars shone above her, she whispered to herself, "This is where I was meant to be." As months turned into a year, Emily's life continued to unfold in ways she never expected. She had performed at grand halls and appeared in magazines, but she still felt most at peace when she sat alone at a piano, with no one around but the music. The world saw her as a rising star, but she still saw herself as the same girl who once served coffee and dreamed quietly between tables. Her journey had brought her far, but deep down, she longed for something more personal. Something that wasn't about fame or applause, but connection. She wanted her music to reach the people who needed it the most, the ones who might see themselves in her story the way she once looked up to others and found courage. One afternoon, she received a call from a small-town community center a few hours away. They were organizing a charity event for children who couldn't afford music lessons. The organizer had seen one of her interviews and asked if she would perform, even just for a short while. Without hesitation, Emily said yes. When the day came, she traveled there quietly, wearing a simple dress and carrying only her sheet music. The center was small and old, the paint on the walls fading, but there was warmth in the air, a kind of joy that didn't need luxury to exist. The children sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes bright with excitement. Some had never seen a real piano before. Emily smiled as she began to play. The tune was soft and light, a melody that told a story of hope. She watched as the children leaned closer, their faces glowing with wonder. When she finished, the room erupted in tiny claps and laughter. A little girl approached her shyly and said, "I want to play like you someday." Emily knelt down and smiled. "You can," she said. "All you need is a dream and a bit of patience." That moment stayed with her. It reminded her of why she had fallen in love with music in the first place, not to be famous, but to make others feel something real. After the event, Daniel met her at the train station. He had been helping her organize her growing commitments, but could tell that this visit had touched her differently. "You look peaceful," he said as they sat on a bench waiting for the train. Emily nodded slowly. "I think I finally understand what I've been searching for," she said. "It's not about being on the biggest stage. It's about finding small moments that mean everything." He smiled. That's the kind of wisdom no teacher can give. Over the following months, Emily started a small program at the Music Foundation, where she had once practiced. With the support of a few kind sponsors, she created free weekend workshops for young people who loved music but couldn't afford lessons. Every Saturday morning, the sound of laughter and piano notes filled the air as she taught them. She didn't just teach them how to play, she taught them how to listen, to others, to themselves, and to life. She told them how music could be a friend during quiet nights, how it could speak when words failed. Many of the students came from difficult backgrounds, and for them, the piano became a safe space just as it had once been for her. Sometimes, when she watched them practice, she would think back to the night that started everything. The night she was just a waitress asked to play for a wealthy crowd. She remembered the fear she felt, the trembling in her hands, and the look of surprise on the guests' faces as she played her heart out. That one moment had changed everything, not because it made her famous, but because it reminded her that courage could open doors no one else could see.
Years went by quietly. Emily's fame faded a little, as fame always does, but her influence grew in another way. The Foundation's program became known across the city, inspiring other musicians to start similar efforts. People began to call her the heart behind the keys.
Daniel often teased her about the nickname. "You've gone from waitress to legend," he'd say, laughing. She would smile and answer, "No, just someone who never stopped believing in music." One winter evening, the Foundation organized a reunion concert for all the students who had learned under her. The hall was filled with familiar faces. Young people who had once been shy beginners now played with confidence and joy. Emily sat in the front row, her eyes glistening as she listened. When the final student finished, the audience called for her to play something. She hesitated at first, but then walked to the piano. Sitting down, she ran her fingers gently over the keys, feeling the cool surface beneath her skin. She played a new piece, one she had been working on quietly for months. It was a song about her journey, about fear, faith, kindness, and home. The melody rose and fell like a memory. The room went silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. When the final note faded, she lifted her hands and looked up, smiling through tears. The applause that followed wasn't wild or loud. It was full of warmth and love. She looked around and saw Daniel, the manager from the restaurant, and many of her old co-workers sitting among the crowd, clapping proudly. After the concert, Daniel walked up to her, still smiling. "You've come a long way," he said softly. She laughed lightly. "It feels like I've lived 100 lives since that night." He nodded. "And every one of them has made your music what it is today." Emily looked around the hall once more. The children, the old friends, the piano that had been both her voice and her companion. "I think I finally understand something," she said. "Music isn't about who plays it best, it's about who plays it with honesty." He nodded again. "And you've done that since the first day I met you." That night, when Emily went home, she sat by her window the same way she used to before everything changed. The city lights flickered outside, and the soft hum of traffic echoed in the distance. She rested her hand on the piano keys, not to play, but simply to feel them. She thought of her mother's words, of Daniel's patience, of the faces of the children who had found their voice through her lessons. She thought of all the people who had believed in her when she barely believed in herself. A smile slowly spread across her face. She wasn't chasing applause anymore, and she didn't need the world to watch her. She had found something more lasting, peace. The next morning, as the sun rose, she returned to the Foundation early. The janitor was still sweeping and the rooms were quiet. She sat at the old piano and began to play softly, the same tune she had played on that unforgettable night years ago. The sound filled the room with warmth and light, wrapping around her like a gentle embrace. As the final note lingered in the air, she whispered to herself, "This is enough." And for the first time in her life, she truly believed it.